You're listening to the Divorce and Your Money Show, the #1 divorce podcast in the United States. I'm your host, Sean Lehman, MBA and certified divorce financial analyst. Be sure to get a copy of my new book called, surprise, surprise, Divorce and Your Money, How to Avoid Costly Divorce Mistakes. You can get a copy on Amazon or by visiting divorceandyourmoney.com. While you're on the website, be sure to book a strategy session with me. We have 30-minute strategy sessions, and you have two options. One in which you can just speak directly about issues that apply to you, regardless of whether you're at the beginning of the divorce, thinking about what you want to do, in the middle, trying to figure out the right path to take, or at the end of your divorce and you're trying to figure out the best options for you. And also there we have a document review appointment where we can review your financial affidavit, your divorce settlement, or other documents related to your divorce, and also include a strategy session on top of that to make sure that whatever you're preparing or about to sign is in your best interest. With that, on to this week's episode. One of the most common questions I get, and one of the biggest anxiety-producing questions I get, is how much is divorce going to cost? How much should I expect to spend on the divorce process? And if you're going to ask your attorney how much divorce is going to cost, they're going to say, it depends. And I've never known an attorney to give a straight answer when it comes to the cost of divorce. And so in this particular episode, I want to go through some considerations in terms of how much the divorce may end up costing you in terms of the financial check that you might have to write. So I'm going to just give some ranges and some considerations and things to think about as it comes to the divorce process. Now, everyone's situation is different. You know, divorce can cost more whether you live in a city versus a suburb versus a small town. Divorce can cost a lot depending upon what assets you have, what needs to be done. There's a lot of variations, but I'm just going to give you a range. And so on the low end, for what I see per person, I see the minimum most people are going to spend on their divorce is about $5,000. And that's for one person. And so it'd be $10,000 as a couple. And that's assuming that everything goes smoothly in divorce. And yes, there are ways to make divorce go smoothly. That's your best case scenario. The normal range I see for people is usually in the 20 to I'd say $35,000 or $40,000 range per person. Sometimes it's closer to 15. Sometimes it's closer to 50. But that, unfortunately, is not uncommon when it comes to the divorce process. And sometimes if there's just a lot of fighting, a lot of complication, the process is going to drag on for several years. The bills can get into the hundreds of thousands of dollars, and I've seen that too. And so what I want to go through is just first is to be aware of the cost of the divorce. And if you're going to be going down this path, I mean, that's why you're listening to this episode, there is a big expense. And you have to really think about what's worth it and what's not when it comes to investing in the divorce process. And I want to go through a few ways in terms of explaining both how you can control the cost of divorce and also how to figure out just a few quick methods on how to pay for it. When it comes to minimizing or controlling the cost of divorce, really the biggest expense when it comes to divorce cost is how much you and your spouse disagree on certain items. To put it a different way is if you and your spouse can come up with solutions on your own and come up with as much of an agreement as you can between the two of you and not involve attorneys, the cheaper the divorce will be, the less expensive it will be. And so if everything is a fight, and if I use an extreme example all the time, is I know I grew up with a middle-class family. They did well for themselves, saved, and they had several $100,000 of savings and a house and the normal stuff. And they spent 100% of their money and then some fighting over everything from not just the big items like houses and retirement accounts, but all the way to who gets the dining room set. And unfortunately, they ended up the divorce process. They spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on legal fees, and that was all the money that they had. On other examples, I know billionaires who've gotten divorced for less than $20,000. And that's because they came up with an agreement ahead of time with their spouse. And yeah, maybe the check they're writing to their spouse is going to be pretty substantial, but they knew what they were going to do. They were smart about legal fees, and they did a very good job with it. So really, it just depends on how much fighting there is. And just some other costs to think about is if you go the full litigation process where you get an attorney, your spouse has an attorney, and you're going to discuss and fight about every detail, that's going to start at a minimum of $10,000 a person. Every time you have to hire an expert, be it someone to do an appraisal for a business, do an appraisal for a house, do a forensic accountant, each time one of those experts gets brought in, expect that to be another $10,000 to $25,000 each. In addition to legal costs on top of that for analyzing the reports and discussing it. And if you were to take that to trial, that check just keeps getting larger and larger. Divorce attorneys are very expensive. I mean, on the low end, I think, a good attorney can be $250, $300 an hour. And on the high end, I know attorneys who are $900 to $1,000 per hour of their time. Imagine that. So a 15-minute conversation can cost you $150 sometimes with your attorney, or sometimes just sending a one-off email. And so you need to be very smart about how you interact with your attorney and how you use that attorney. I already mentioned other professionals, but there's court fees. You have to think about an attorney's full team, paralegals, assistants, etc. There's a lot that can go into divorce and divorce fees. And so one of the questions that you should be thinking about, and one of the most important things we talk about in the divorce process, or I talk about on coaching calls, is how are you going to pay for this? That's one of the most important questions that I get from people all the time. And I'm going to go through just a few quick items to think about. If you have money in a joint account, generally speaking, you're entitled to half of those funds, generally speaking. So if you need to withdraw half those funds to start putting your little war chest together for attorney's fees, then you should do so. Now, by doing so, you're also going to definitely be tipping your hand in the divorce process, but that's something that may be necessary, particularly if you didn't originally have funds to go through the divorce process. If you have savings, then you can consider using your savings. If you have savings in your own name, if you need to borrow funds from a friend or a family member to make the initial retainer for an attorney, then borrow funds from an attorney. And then there's also retirement accounts and home equity lines and other things like that you should be thinking about. But when you walk into an attorney's office and say, hey, I want to hire you for my case, you should be expecting to write a check for anywhere between $5,000 and $25,000 the day you hire that attorney. And anywhere within there is very much normal range. And so I just want you to be really cognizant of the cost of divorce and the things that you can be thinking of. The biggest factor, as I said, is acrimony. And so if you can come to, and I work with a lot of people in this situation where you and your spouse, let's just say there's 10 issues that you're discussing and have to fight over. If you can get to an agreement on 8 of them, and then you only have to work out 2 issues, then that can save you a lot of money in your divorce, because there's only 2 things that need to be discussed versus starting from scratch with all 10. And so things like that can help you save money in divorce. And maybe it can be a small thing like, hey, if you can start a negotiation when possible with your spouse, it's not always possible to negotiate with them. But if you're in a situation where you can say, well, I think we're going to both keep our cars. Well, you've already started an agreement on that. And that's one less thing you can check off the list. And just getting the cars agreement set in stone before having attorneys have to negotiate over it could end up saving you a few $1,000s. So sometimes even smaller items that you can come up with can help you. But if you continue to drag out the process and every attorney wants to beef up their, I won't say every attorney, but it doesn't hurt the attorneys when you have more to fight about. It's something to be aware of as you go through the divorce process. So just as a quick recap, On the low end, divorce can be $5,000 or $10,000 a person to get things done if you have an attorney involved. And on the high end, you can go, I'd say the average is usually around the $25,000 to $50,000 range. But if you are fighting about everything and this goes to trial and you have money to take it all the way to trial, legal fees can get to $100,000 or more. So be very wary and very well prepared when it comes to figuring out what's the right investment that you need to make for your case. And sometimes I'll tell people like, hey, I don't know if you want to spend an extra $10,000 on this issue because it may not be worth it for you. But other times I'll say, yeah, you know what? You should spend $25,000 on this issue because if you get $300,000 in return, that's a useful return on investment to invest in legal fees. Every situation is different, and there's always lots of complications depending upon what's going on. But be prepared for the cost of divorce if you're going in that direction, and go in with eyes wide open. Regardless, it's going to be an expensive check that you're going to write, and it's up to you to be prepared for it and determine what really is appropriate given my circumstances that you're willing to put into this process to secure your future and get through it in one piece. Now, before you go, I want to make sure you get some really important information. I'm going to tell you about a few things that may be of interest to you. First, as a favor, is if you could leave a review. If you're on the iTunes store, leave a review on iTunes, or if you search Divorce and Your Money on a website called Trustpilot or on Google, you can leave a review there. It's quick, it's anonymous, it only takes a few seconds, and I really, really appreciate your feedback. I have lots of reviews on iTunes and on Trustpilot, and I appreciate hearing your stories. Also, on divorceandyourmoney.com, you can get lots of great information. Of course, you can book a 30-minute strategy session directly with me. There's two types of strategy calls you can book. Just a normal strategy session where we discuss the questions that are most pressing to you, regardless of where you are in the divorce process, be at the beginning, towards the end, or in the middle. Doesn't really matter. There's lots of great information we can cover during that strategy call. And also, we have a document review call. It's been one of the biggest things that we've done over the past year, which is you can send me your documents, be it your financial affidavit, a settlement agreement, or other documents that you would like for me to review. And then I review those in advance of the call. And then we get to discuss them in depth as part of a strategy session and get specific answers to some of the specific documents and things that you are considering. Also, for those who need ongoing support, we do have a few options for ongoing support, but regardless, it all starts with a coaching call that you can book at divorceandyourmoney.com. Don't forget to also get a copy of my new book. It's called Divorce and Your Money: How to Avoid Costly Divorce Mistakes. It's available on my website or also on Amazon. You just look me up and make sure you get the new edition. It is filled with excellent information regarding the divorce process, and I know that you will find it helpful. And once you've read the book, be sure to leave a review. That really helps me. I appreciate your feedback, and it also helps other people as they try and find this information. And finally, last but not least by any means, is on the store at divorceandyourmoney.com. If you click on the store button, you can get access to the full archive of podcast episodes. There's over 200 episodes, and what's great about the store link is that the episodes are organized in neat buckets. And they're organized by topic, so it's very easy to follow along with the information. And it is easy to pick out the key topics that matter most to you. And you can get all of those podcast episodes in the store. Thank you so much for listening. I'm your host, Sean Lehman, MBA and Certified Divorce Financial Analyst. Take care.